So welcome everyone. My name is Margaret Quatten, and I'm the Green New Deal National Organizer with Grassroots Global Justice. Thank you all for joining us. I'm gonna pass it to my co-presenter, Tamara, to introduce herself before sort of diving into the session.
Hi, everybody. I'm your local neighborhood climate agitator. My name is Tamara Tolles O'Laughlin. I'm a national climate strategist and environmental advocate. And I'm here on behalf of Black people who are tired of being told that they don't understand stuff or just not being spoken to. So excited to get into this discussion. Glad to be here with you.
Thank you, Tamara. Yes, so this session is all about the Thrive Agenda, but really how we win it. And so it's going to be a bit more on learning about budget reconciliation, which is this sort of arcane process that we're about to be in the throes of over the summer. And I think to Tamara's point, it is so critical that we actually are both following and understanding this, because we know that it's going to not only affect our lives, but also that we clearly have the capabilities to influence this process. So before I start, I wanted to say, one, feel free to engage us in the chat or through the question and answer form. We'll try and track some of the major questions and get to them at the end, though there will also be folks who are helping to answer them directly in the chat. I also, as Ashley did earlier, want to recognize that today is the National Day of Action in solidarity with the people of Palestine, who are in the struggle against colonization, apartheid, and erasure. And so I hope to see some of you in the streets. I know I'll be heading out there after this is done. Okay, so let's get started. So if you were here in the session right before, you will have just heard about the Thrive Act. But to recap for some of the folks who are just joining us now, the Thrive Act, which stands for Transform, Heal, and Renew by Investing in a Vibrant Economy, is a bill that was introduced into Congress as a roadmap for a recovery package that actually meets this moment. And as Ashley from the Indigenous Environmental Network was saying, we are facing multiple crises at once that have only intensified this past year, from structural racism to unemployment to climate chaos. I know many of us, I know at least for myself, sat in horror seeing images of the sky turn orange during the wildfires in the Bay. And the images of folks struggling against the freezing temperatures that Ash was speaking about, which just happened in Texas. So and I know that we don't have time to wait, which is why the Thrive Act is calling for Congress to boldly confront climate chaos by putting millions of people to work, moving us toward alternatives, why the Thrive Act is calling for us to continue to tackle the COVID pandemic and prepare for future public health issues by investing in care workers like nurses, domestic workers, and home health aides. And then finally, why the Thrive Act is calling for these investments to be distributed in a way that prioritizes Black, Indigenous, Latinx, Asian Pacific Islander, Arab, and white working class communities who have been hit first and worst by these crises. So 10 trillion over 10 years is no joke. It's what we actually need to dramatically change where we get our energy from, what sectors are seen as essential, and how we realize a just transition. So now that we've heard a little bit about the transformative potential of the Thrive Act, I wanted to just share my screen to show let's present. So one, you can see one of the actions we took on Thrive. When it loads, you can peep Ashley in the corner there. Before I actually get started into how we win this, I wanted to again put up the QR code so that you can stay up to date on what's happening with this campaign, but then also beyond it by signing up for the email list at the United Frontline table. The way you do that is by putting your camera on your phone, and then holding it over the image on the screen, which will pop up a link to the United Frontline table. So again, now that we've heard about the transformative potential of the Thrive Act, I wanted to get into how we win it. And hint, it is not going to be by directly passing this piece of legislation. So first, I want to talk a little bit about the political moment. Then we'll hear from Tamara on the budget reconciliation process and the details of how that gets done. And then I'll talk about some of the ways that we can take action. All right. So the political moment. We are at this point where we actually have a major opportunity to move a huge scale transformative program right now. There's a Democratic trifecta, which means that the White House, the Senate, and Congress are all held by Democrats. And while I know that Democrats are not always our friends, this in and of itself was somewhat unexpected. A lot of social movement organizations and progressive forces came together to oust Trump and successfully accomplished that, which I think was a historic victory in and of itself. One of only a few times in history we held a president to one term, and particularly sort of a neo-fascist at that. But when it came to the House and the Senate, the results were somewhat disappointing. As I'm sure you all remember, the Senate ended up coming down to Georgia, in which the two Democratic candidates were underdogs. We're seeing John Ossoff and Reverend Raphael Warnock. And I think, a lot of us sitting on the edge of our seats watching these final results come in. And due to this incredible organizing that happened, both of these candidates ended up winning. And I say all of this to say that the majorities that are held in the House and the Senate are razor thin. In the Senate, it is 50-50, and Kamala Harris is the tie-breaking vote. And so we might not have this type of position for very long. Midterms are next year, and this could change really quickly, as it was the first time there's a Democratic trifecta in 3 years. So not only was it a surprise that Georgia ended up winning and that we were in a better position to pass legislation for that reason, the fact that Biden administration hasn't taken its immediate sort of neoliberal turn was also, I think, somewhat of a surprise. So Biden has talked about wanting to be the climate president who tackles climate change head on, and is therefore willing to go bigger in his proposals than many of us, I think, were expecting. Like I said, given his sort of neoliberal, deregulate, corporation and war first spending approach in the past. So the American Jobs Plan and the American Families Plan are actually taking a different approach to this and saying, okay, we need a larger scale recovery. As Ashley was saying, we need it to be bigger than what's offered here. But it was a surprisingly better starting point than I think most of us were expecting. And especially as someone who's worked with folks who are doing care work, there was a lot in there about how we need to recenter our economy on care and really start spending the money that we need to on things from childcare to healthcare to universal preschool. So the proposal for an economic recovery in this moment, with this configuration of forces in the White House, the Senate, and Congress, has the potential, I think, to be huge and transformative. And to be clear, that at no point in recent history has there been this level of investment on the line, particularly with up to 50% being dedicated to the front lines. But we know that this is not going to happen without a fight. And especially for making sure what we want stays in it. So whether that's public transit or funding for clean water, for retrofitting public housing, care work, or agriculture workers, we have to make sure that we understand what is about to happen and what's going to come next if we want to make our vision into a reality. Because there's going to be an economic recovery package. I can assure you that. But if it's going to support our communities and support the projects that we've been building, or if it's going to actively harm our communities, is what's, I think, right now at the negotiating table. So it's not going to be the same as passing any other bill, which is hard in and of itself. But given these razor-thin margins, I think this process of budget reconciliation is the alternative, and it's going to be complicated. So with that, I want to pass it to Mara to take us through a bit about where this came from, why it's happening, and how we can engage in the process.
Awesome. Thanks for making some space for us to have this conversation and to take people through what is a pretty unsexy process. Just want to, before I move into talking about some of the process behind reconciliation, I want to flag that I am currently in Cherokee, Piscataway, and Lumbee territory, also known as Baltimore Charm City. So this picture of Amsterdam is not actually where I am. Also want to flag that I live here with my family. So if a cat, a human, or any number of children run past the screen, that I can't predict it. It'll be gone before you know it. A little bit about me. So my work in this moment is about building strategic interventions to support global anti-racist celebratory climate action with so much accountability that it feels like we're in a relationship. I think it's really important that we're all looking for these things in this moment, and why, just another reason why it's important for us to understand this process that we have not been invited to. My theory of why we need to do this is that the climate change we're experiencing is a design problem, and in order for us to deal with what is a feature, not a bug, is for us to engage in a total redesign. That means new agreements generated by the practice of truth-telling and care and repair, and then continuing to do that until we stop harming the largest number of people ever for the smallest gains for the really wealthy. It's time for us to undo many things, and this conversation is a part of how we're going to do that. So I'm going to touch on 4 or 5 things. What is reconciliation? What does it do? How does it work? What are the limitations? And why does it matter for climate that Congress actually functions? Because that's literally what we're talking about. So reconciliation, just to clear the air, is actually about reconciling the budget that's proposed annually or every time there's a budget resolution with the tax code, the laws that already exist for programs like Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, food stamps, all the things that are built into the way that our system currently operates. So making sure that there's money for those things, money to make sure that we keep the government running all at the same time. The process for that, I'm going to talk about a little bit more, but reconciliation, when you hear that word, it feels like a universe, but really it's just a tool, and we use it pretty regularly, which is important to manage, because the idea of reconciliation isn't that it's new. There have been 21 resolutions passed, 25 made in a time and place when there are 100 senators and 435 other folks who make decisions on our behalf. What it does is act as a bypass or a highway, which our communities are very comfortable with, to move past all of the gridlock in Congress that keeps anything from getting done fairly regularly. So it's used in Congress to make legislation easier and to get it out of the Senate, because the Senate is in such a small number compared to the folks in the House. Anyone who's in the minority has to use a lot of tactics to get a thing through or to stop a thing. So we're talking about blocking and building. It was first used in 1980, created out of the Congressional Budget Act of 1974 to begin at that time. And among the other things that it does, it establishes a House and Senate Budget Committee and the Congressional Budget Office, whose job it is just to look at the numbers and send out an impartial estimate of the thing that is being proposed. So my co-presenter talked about the trifecta. If you are in Baltimore and Preakness is happening, or you just got out of Derby, or you're waiting to go to Belmont Stakes, the idea of the trifecta is a really important concept for you, along with your Black Eyed Susan cocktail. So I just want to lift up that the idea of a trifecta in this context is not about what horse you're running, but about the horse we're all sitting on, hoping to catch some tail. The House, the Senate, and the White House being held in the power of one party, one Democratic Party, gets to do the project the way they want. So they run an agenda that is their own. We call it the trifecta. It's happened 4 times in the hands of Republicans and 3 times in the hands of Democrats. So let's talk a little bit more about what reconciliation actually looks like. So step one is a congressional budget is set. Then it calls for a congressional budget resolution to be written. That means all the money that goes out, all the money that will be spent, whether or not we're going to reach our budget and have a surplus, which usually happens when there are Democrats. This is not about my love for either party, it's just a set of facts. Or a deficit, which largely happens when there are Republicans. Republicans spend, Democrats save, and then we switch power and we have to do it all over again. The resolution cannot be stalled. That just says we're going to have to develop a budget and pass it. That can't be stalled by the filibuster or the call for 60 votes and supermajority, and it doesn't need the president to sign off on it. Those are huge things that can create a lot of political drama, which we live in and spend a lot of our time being pilloried by in the news. So step two after that is it also says that you have to have committees that are already standing and any others that might be necessary to lay out their spending. So based on what they focus on, if they focus on energy and environment, if they focus on any number of topics, if they focus on education and health, then those committees have to come up with a budget that fits in that category or come up with reasons why they need to ask for more or less. In any event, it tells these specific committees that they have to write legislation. So it isn't just about a resolution, which doesn't have the same weight as a bill. It says you have to write a bill that makes it happen, which essentially executes how you're going to spend those target dollars within the budget you were given. So the committees make changes to spending revenues and deficits, and they line by line it. The third thing that happens is communities then write bills to achieve those plans, and they have to lay out whether or not they can do it. Even if they're lowering the cost of doing business, they have to be clear on that. They have to explain it. A number of committees can be charged with making changes under a budget, depending on how many different things like environment, climate, transportation, healthcare. All of these things require lots of different discrete groups to have a sense of how they're going to work on it. They're going to write bills and their committees are going to be affected. So usually it means a bunch of different groups have to put out a bunch of different bills, and they get voted on, and those bills themselves have to get harmonized so that it's one package that passes through. We already had one reconciliation this year, so I just want to flag that the idea of having more than one, which happens pretty regularly, is the idea that you can accomplish the government's work without spending all of its money. You may need to break that into more than one package. The last reconciliation put the stimulus in people's bank accounts. So we're talking about a second reconciliation. Those bills that come out of all of that discussion amongst partisans and people on different committees has special status. It's protected from the filibuster, which means it's protected from endless debate. I will talk more about that, just like the actual budget itself that gave birth to it. So then it passes with a simple majority on a final vote. So reconciliation, I want to go back to the conceptualization of a highway for our communities in the U.S. context. Highways usually signify that we're about to get moved. So I just want to be very sensitive to the idea that reconciliation as a fast track in this context is exactly about fast tracking a process that isn't held up by endless debate. Because most of the time, those debates, unless about principal things, are really about stopping a bill, making it so slow that people can create room to make backroom deals and move votes from one part of the bill to the other. So the idea of fast tracking is so that a big thing can get done without people playing politics and keeping it from happening. So one of the features of reconciliation is that it limits debate in the Senate to 20 hours. That's a big deal because the endless debate by the folks who have a lot of power because there's less of them, they could just keep the thing going until we've passed the time and the government shuts down. So reconciliation limited to 20 hours in the Senate is a big deal. They don't normally have that. The House normally does. It also limits amendments that can be made and says that you can make them, but there are no debates on the floor. So you can't just keep talking about the thing. The filibuster is often a tactic to drag things out. This limits the ability to do that. The House already has rules like that, so it doesn't really change how the House operates. But what the House brings to this process is a rule of germaneness, which basically means it's got to be relevant. The things that are being put into reconciliation have to actually be about moving money. They can't be about things that don't affect the budget. This is really important for climate people because immigration, managed decline, managed retreat, the status of climate refugees. There are lots of folks who want to move climate and immigration into this discussion because the financial implications aren't on the top. surface of the issue, but they are underlying it. So even if you don't see it in this year's budget, it's just going to keep showing up. So there are some real things that we need to watch for in that space. So other considerations for reconciliation, it's not just how much money you get, how much money you bring in, whether or not you can keep putting us into debt that every subsequent generation will have to pay for, and whether you do that in the window that the legislation will impact, which is about a decade. Those are set by congressional directive. It's not just about the time in the amendment or germaneness. Congress can only use reconciliation once or twice per year because the getting of a budget resolution is a pretty big deal. So like your favorite sport, you pick it, like insert your sport here, that does a draft. It takes a lot of people getting together to decide what the starting lineup is going to be. It takes a lot of effort. It doesn't happen often enough. So we have to have our agenda set on what we're going to push and fight for as people who mobilize for change. So the other thing that's really important to take away from this conversation is that folks who don't want us to win make it seem like reconciliation is like the birth of a child based on the North Star found by 3 wise men in the wilderness, right? So like they make it seem like reconciliation, you want to do this magical thing. Guess what? Every time a party hits the trifecta, this is what they do because the other side is in opposition. Republicans have used it for nefarious reasons. Again, I'm not a partisan. These are straight facts. Republicans have used reconciliation to enact tax cuts for the rich, attack public health, Medicaid, Social Security, food stamps, turn welfare into a block grant with so many different constraints on it that it is essentially a useless program relative to its ability for people to receive cash benefits in a hard time. They've also used it to cut out immigration rights and send money to really rich people. So just want to put it out there that it has been used plenty to do lots. If you don't believe me, you can look at the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, the American Health Care of 2017. We're all still feeling that, where they tried to repeal the ACA, yelling the words Obamacare, and took away some pretty important provisions like taking down the mandate to zero. Also, the Economic Growth and Tax Act of 2001, the Bush tax cuts right after the no new taxes language. So just want to flag that there are real times when this has been used and will be again. The Democrats have in general used it to pass healthcare reform, student loan reform, which, good Lord, we need more of that, to pass major reductions on the deficit, again, pointing to the idea that if Democrats have historically put more money or made a surplus in the budget, this is just saying they got to make sure they're cutting down the debt we're all going to pay generation over generation. They've also used it to deal with the debt that we're all going to pay for. So other things that are really important, examples of this, if you want to check for yourself, is the Healthcare and Education Reconciliation Act. It was the companion legislation that brought us the ACA and student loan reforms, the Omnibus Reconciliation Acts of 93 and 1980 under Clinton and Carter were both brought to us by reconciliation. So I just wanted to lift up that we are in a moment where these issues are very much integrated. Thanks to the generations that currently exist, we have a lot of smart folks thinking about the fact that looking at the things we need separately only hurts our community. So if we are going to have to climb a summit to keep ourselves from dying on a fiery gas ball and setting that in motion by the end of this decade, the climate decade, we really have to have our eye on these really boring, unsexy political processes, because the inside of those words, those comments, those grandstanding moments, and all of the talk that happens when we pundits, people are deciding our future. So we have to worry about reconciliation. We have to understand it. We have to move the things that the president has laid out and then fight to get everybody who uses our silence as a proxy to push for the largest possible things, the largest gains for our communities, so that the future is not one where we're begging and paying double for the privilege of being harmed. The other thing we have to deal with once we get through with that is the filibuster, as is just a racist dreadlock left over from Jim Crow. I can say that because I just cut mine off, so don't write me. Just want to flag that, like, it's really, this whole system is bound to and dedicated to the destruction of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. While we are essential and critical, these rules, regulations, and processes are the thing that have helped to keep the status quo of us never having enough of what we need to survive, or even to continue to be essential for everybody else. So the idea that we need to deal with reconciliation and the filibuster as a part of dealing with massive climate legislation like the Thrive Agenda, like the the Green New Deal for nations, towns, and cities. None of this stuff is going to go anywhere if we don't get rid of these racist stumbling blocks put in to make our lives harder. So recognizing that lots of people are going to have to be busy at a time when they'd rather have their vaccine privilege vacation, pay attention to what is happening on the Hill this summer, because we will not be able to get where we need to get if we don't fight for these hurdles to go away, so that we can get the dollars invested into our community. There are no good things that have come out of the Biden administration yet that can happen unless this happens. So what we want, which is even more, will require even more momentum. So really excited to get back to conversation with Margaret around some of these things. If you want to connect with me, I'd be happy to talk about all of this. If you want to fight with me, you can meet me on Twitter. That's where everyone else does it. But it's just really important for us to own this conversation, not show up as just users of the system, but everybody involved should be responding to us. They are proxies for our vote, and our silence gives them permission to run all over us. So let's stop being silent. Margaret?
Thank you, Tamara. Thank you, Tamara. That was incredible. Not only I feel like that I learned a lot about how budget reconciliation really happens. I think that the emphasis on, like, you know, we have an opportunity to move some of this really large scale legislation. There's this like old crusty, like, process that is bound for austerity, and so we're gonna have to interrupt that, right? We're gonna have to bring some new life, and I think this summer is where it's at. When we were talking just yesterday, I loved it. You said it was like hot law summer. I was like,
yes, I'm getting a t-shirt made up right now out of sustainable reuse t-shirts. Hot law summer. I'm looking for it. I'll be outside with some helados in case anybody wants some, because they're going to be doing all the things that will matter for us. And if we just let it go by and then they have some breaks, they will come back, and then we'll be in the middle of the fight for 2022. We won't have accomplished enough of anything. So it's been so fun to like just think about the fact that this information was hidden in plain sight from us. We're always kept so busy putting out fires, running from mold, protecting our families, trying to make ends meet, and with, as you said, crusty people giving us a crust of bread to like get through our lives, that we have never been able to demand that these processes that pretend to represent what we want have included the stuff we care about. The budget in any universe, whether we're talking about a nonprofit or organization or a church, the budget reflects the priorities. And so the budget of America should reflect its priorities and making sure that we exist in the future. And when we have unlimited amounts of capital going to things nobody wants to do, if you look on climate Twitter or energy Twitter or Facebook or TikTok, there's tons of people saying we don't want to spend our money on war and death. Our budget should reflect that, not be a blank redacted spot that says endless amounts of dollars go there. Y'all fight over these crumbs.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, at GGJ, a lot of talk about is this idea of the fact that we need to divest from these systems that are harming us, that are clearly the priority of our budget right now, and invest into things that, into systems of care and to what we actually need in our communities to not just survive, but to actually thrive. So that I think is right on point in terms of that our budget, truly reflects what we care about, reflects who we care about. And this is one of those opportunities that we have to like interrupt that process, to learn, okay, this is where it goes down. Let me get in there and like make sure that the priorities that are real priorities for people on the ground are the ones that are reflected in that budget. So I know that we're in our last minute. I want to just say thank you to you, Tamara, and also to all of the folks who are watching right now. This is absolutely a moment in which we can engage and in which we can have, I think, take powerful action. And so just to emphasize, this is a unique opportunity right now. Like Tamara was saying, this sort of trifecta has only happened a couple of times, and with Democrats even less. That there's actually, I think, some momentum on our side, that we have been fighting over this last period to, I think, cohere some of our movement demands, to really say, this is what we need from this is what would really address climate change and not be a false solution. This is what would really address some of the issues around structural racism and not just be placating. So I think that we have some of that momentum right now, and we have a short window. This summer, hot ledge summer, hot law summer is where it's at. And I think this is going to be our time to take action. So again, if you want to stay engaged with what's happening with this process, scan this QR code. You'll be able to sign up for the United Frontline table. And then similarly, folks are also going to be making videos about what an economic recovery plan that is, actually centering climate justice, racial justice, and gender justice would mean for them and for their communities. And so if you're interested in doing that, email us at info@unitedfrontlinetable.org. There's a storytelling training to help us be able to tell our stories, because it's so important that we're the ones that are actually speaking to, who are able to speak to what's happening are the ones that are centered in this process. So again, thank you all for coming. And I think that concludes our session.